want to thank everybody for coming this afternoon. My name is Fred Litwin.
Noted author Fred Litwin. And of course, Fred is also the author of I Was a Teenage JFK Conspiracy Freak, On the Trail of Delusion, and Oliver Stone's Film Flam, The Demagogue of Dealey Plaza.
Fred Litwin is here. He's a longtime author and certainly watcher of politics.
Joining us, Fred Litwin. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Welcome to another edition of On the Trail of Delusion. I'm Fred Litwin, and today we're going to have another episode to separate fact from fiction and try to actually give you something of substance about the JFK assassination rather than the usual fantasy stuff you see on YouTube. I'm very excited. Today, my guest is my good friend Steve Rowe. Steve Rowe was born in Michigan, but he actually grew up in Texas. And He worked in the oil and gas industry for 35 years, including many, many years in South America, 10 years in South America. There's a lot of stories, I'm sure, with that. He's married. He lives in San Antonio. In terms of the JFK assassination, he's authored a chapter in Gail Nix Jackson's book, Pieces of the Puzzle. And Steve also has a terrific blog. And you could find the address and where you can go to his blog in the notes, but a terrific blog on the assassination, on General Walker, and a whole variety of other topics. So, Steve Rowe, welcome to On the Trail of Delusion.
Hi, Fred. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Thanks for the intro there.
Yeah. So tell me, basically, how did you get interested in the JFK assassination?
Well, when it first happened.
Right, yes.
I was 8 years old. I grew up in Dallas. And I was in elementary school at that time. Then, so they pulled us in. We was at recess, I'll try to boil this down quickly as I can. But, we get called in to the film room and they sent us home. And so, as an 8-year-old kid, I'm pretty impressionable, gosh, what's going on, the president. And, I came home. My mother was at home. She used to work at Parkland Hospital, but she was off that day. So I found her kind of crying. She's watching TV, the coverage and everything. And I said, wow, there's something big's going on here. So that's what kind of sparked it. And then a little bit later, when I got a little older, I started going to the library and reading some books. Started out in conspiracy books mainly, like everybody. I gave it up in the 70s, I just lost interest in I had my career going, and anyway, I picked it back up again in late 90s to early 2000s, I still believed in a conspiracy at that time, but.
Right. So what led you to change your mind?
I just put the books away.
Right.
I went in and started reading the documentation, Mary Farrell's a real great place to get it, and just going through the documents, reading it, but there's always something that bothered me about that whole thing. Even when I was a kid, well, if there's a conspiracy, why did he leave the building, So anyway, I just went through the documents and started reading up, and come to find out, a lot of the stories in those books were just complete BS. So you got to go primary documents. That's why I did it.
I totally agree. Primary documents completely changes your life. I remember one time I was living in Singapore and I bought Richard Trask's book, Pictures of the Pain. And I was still sort of on the fence, and I got this book and I started reading and I said, wow, this is real history. This book doesn't read like the conspiracy books, It was such a pleasure to read something real. Where did your interest start for General Walker and that part of the case?
Back in 2015 or so, I was contacted by Gail Nix Jackson. Well, I wrote that chapter in the book. We were friends, She's from Dallas and I'm from Dallas. So I got kind of involved with that. I said, she was going to talk about General Walker. And I said, yeah, I like to too. So, but you know, it's a really untold part of that assassination and all that. I got really interested in that guy. I'm still interested in him. He's a fascinating guy. So that's how I got it. And I said, well, you know what? I need to get in here and research it and get some truth out there a little bit, especially about the shooting.
Well, I got to say, I mean, I've been very fortunate to have a tour of where General Walker used to live in Dallas. You given an amazing tour of the area, the laneway, the house, is all the buildings around it. I mean, I strongly, if you ever have a chance, hire Steve Rowe to give you a tour of the Walker shooting. It's absolutely amazing.
The threat from within, what he felt there was a threat of communists inside our government, inside of our clergy, all over, you know. So he's really paranoid about it, and we'll go into why. I had a conversation with a guy named Bob Rowan. He runs the New York Military Symposium up there. He's got a little site about General Walker, and he gets people to come in there and, hey, do you remember General Walker? And some of them do, you know, they were there. It's true. If there was a real life Forrest Gump, it would be Edwin Walker. I mean, my God, that guy's been through so much history, from the World War II to Korea to civil rights, Germany on the front of the line there, to the Kennedy assassination, to the Ole Miss riots. I mean, he's just incredible life. It's so much more interesting, in my opinion, than the JFK assassination. But that picture above, I got that from a guy named Greg Green. A little history about Walker first. Born Center Point down here. He grew up on a ranch up there. The ranch has been around since the 1850s. Finally, he went into the Shriner Institute in Kerrville, that was a military school, was set up in 1923 by former Texas Ranger, Captain Charles Shriner. It was an all-male military school. Walker is right there. That's Walker there, second from the left. Here's a picture of the Walker family. There's only two boys. The father is George Pickney Walker and his wife Charlotte, which is the mama's boy. General Walker was named after his grandfather, and this is the name Edwin Anderson Walker, same name. He went to the New Mexico Military Institute. That's a private school out there in New Mexico, Roswell, New Mexico. And then he got an appointment to the U.S. Military Academy, or West Point, 1927, by a Texas senator there, who oddly enough championed the 18th Prohibition Amendment, a teetotaler. I got that from a good author named Peter Adams. He wrote the book, The Insurrectionist. It's a book about General Walker, mainly in his times in the 50s and 60s. Very well written book, well sourced, solid sources. I highly recommend that book for all you people interested in Walker. Anyway, graduated in West Point in 31. His specialty was field artillery, so he commissioned out as a second lieutenant. And here's a little yearbook of him in 1931 at West Point. This is a real interesting description of him from a fellow cadet. It says, he says, Walker was assuredly unassertive, kind of a aloof character back then, I guess. Maybe he's a little shy, I don't know. But he wasn't an outgoing, boisterous type of fellow. That's the way I understood it. And he graduated, down in the bottom of his class, third of the class. Okay, this is this comes from the Walker Papers up in Austin, Briscoe Library. This is one description of his military service. I'm not going to bore you with everything in there. Highly decorated, Silver Star, that's for bravery. Bronze Star with cluster, and then all through their campaign medals. Unbelievable. He's given a medal by the King of Norway. After the war, Nazis left that Norway, and the king came back to Norway and gave him the medal. Now, one of the first war experiences Walker had was with a unit called the Special Service Force, for Special Service. This was a joint Canadian and American commando paratrooper force, this specialized force. These are the forerunners of the Green Berets, the Rangers, Navy SEALs. I mean, they're special Walker was the colonel of the 3rd Regiment of that. So they went to the Aleutian Islands up there off of Alaska. The Japanese had gone in there and took those islands over. By the time they got there, the Japanese were all gone and they left. So after that, they went into Europe. They went into the most hardest fought battles was in Italy, Anzio. So they saw real heavy fighting. They went into Rome, liberated Rome, and then they went over to France, southern France. And this picture right here is from a Canadian Library Archives up there. And they're on a boat, a Canadian boat. Walker's there on the right in the green. This is a real interesting picture. This is a turning point of General Walker, his life. This is when he went to Korea. This is where he became bitter about the war experience and politicians and war. As you probably know, the United Nations was created in 1947.
Yep.
And Korea was a United Nations effort. It ended up a stalemate. Truman was involved with it, and then Eisenhower took over when he was president, and they just drew the line up there. But anyway, he became bitter with the way they were not fighting the war. He was there. He was at Heartbreak Ridge, artillery, infantry. He said they could have won the war, like MacArthur said, and then they pulled MacArthur out. Truman did. And the way they fought that war was just horrendous. Couldn't shoot at certain times, do artillery on their enemy, and they'd sit there and watch them build it back up. And this was kind of the genesis of his later right-wing movement. Okay, after the Korean War, he ended up in the command of the Arkansas Military District. And here he is in Little Rock, Arkansas. This was called Operation Arkansas. There was a ruling that everybody's pretty much familiar with, Brown versus Board of Education, which gave the public schools had to be integrated. That was a Supreme Court ruling by Earl Warren. Walker was in that district, and they were going to integrate Little Rock Central High School. The governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus, fought that. He had his National Guard out there, and black people, called the Little Rock Nine, tried to enroll in that high school. And they had the National Guard turn them around. Well, Eisenhower got real mad about this. He called them up there. They went, had a meeting at Camp David with the governor, and they thought they had a handshake deal. We're going to work it out and proceed, with the law of the land. Well, that didn't happen. So what happened then? They drew plans up, and Walker had to draw plans up to get federalize the National Guard under his command, and they sent troops over to integrate that high school. So Walker was in on the planning thing, but privately, Walker was not thrilled with it. He was against it. He didn't think the federal government should be doing that, but he was in the Army and he was taking orders. So he brought the 101st Airborne over there, and they went into town, overwhelming force, and went around the school, and next thing you know, the students were admitted. And he stayed there for 2 years, and then later Faubus did some pretty shady stuff and closed the schools down. But in 1959, Walker gets command of the 24th Infantry in Germany, a really high prestigious thing. This is where Walker got in problems. He started indoctrinating his troops with what he called the Pro-Blue program. And this was based off his experience in Korea. He felt that the people now, or the soldiers over there now, needed to know why they were out there on the line against the communists. He crossed the line when he started saying, well, you need to check at the home front with your local politicians, representatives, look at their voting records and stuff like that, which is a direct violation of the Hatch Act, where the military can't do that, Can't get political. You can't use your rank to do that. Tabloid paper, they're called the Overseas Weekly. The soldiers paper out there in Germany, picked up on this stuff, and he was picking up, hey, this guy's doing some John Birch stuff up there, you know. They ended up pulling Walker's command. They brought him back to the States. And it started another big deal in the Senate and what they call the Muslim hearings. Well, while he was back in 1961 in the States, he went out on leave and he thought about it, and that's when he thought he would resign. And he did here. This is on November 4th, 61. He was probably down there at home in Kerr County. He turned in his resignation at Fort Sam Houston, and he resigned. And they gave him an honorable discharge, I guess. Now, people ask, why did he resign? He could have retired. He had 30 years, a little over 30 years. If he resigned, that means he would have gone out on inactive status. If he was on inactive status and another war broke out, he could be called back into the military. He didn't want that. And the reason he didn't want that, because he smelled Vietnam coming right up. And he wanted nothing to do with Vietnam. He'd already been through a bad experience. He thought this was going to be a second Korea, where politicians run the war, you know, no fire zones, no shooting times. And come think of it, he was right. Well, that's why he resigned. And when he resigned, he forfeited his pension. Back in '62, Walker was out in California, and he was visiting some of these old first special service veterans. They were had like a little reunion out there, and the newspaper got wind of him. They were asking him why he was associated with the John Birch Society, and there he gives his reasons, just like I outlined. You know, the Korean War, why they weren't allowed to win the war, and he thought the John Birch Society was a common interest. They thought that the communists were getting into the military, the State Department, all kinds of wild stuff, into society. And that's why he called it a threat from within. And he felt that those were people he would like to associate with. Whether or not he was a member, I don't know. They don't carry cards or anything like that. What did he do then in 1961 after he signed? He moved to Dallas. In 61, Dallas was, let's just say, there was a lot of right-wingers there. Some of them extreme, some of them just very conservative, all shades of whatever. Of course, there's money there, people with money, and they're real conservative on 4011 Turtle Creek Boulevard. Remember, Fred, we went to that house.
Right, yeah. I
Mountain.
noticed that the flags are upside down.
Yes, the flags were upside down. He would fly those. Of course, that's a symbol of a country in distress. And a little interesting tidbit about those flags is after President Kennedy was assassinated, he turned them right side up. So
Wow.
that just shows you his mindset, Somebody had a bright idea that he should run for governor of Texas. So he accepted it, but I don't know, in the back of his mind, everybody knew he hadn't had a snowball chance in hell of winning, but he's getting a lot of very popular. To do that, he had to run in a Democratic primary. There was 9 candidates running for that Democratic primary for governor. And he ended up dead last, of course.
Wow.
He did carry his county, Kerr County, and I think Ector County out there in West Texas.
Why did he not run as a Republican?
His family was traditionally Democratic.
Okay.
His mother, she was heavily involved in the Democratic Party way back there in the 20s and 30s and 40s. But of course, you know who won. That was John Connally. This was a little ad here that put in by Joe Brennan, one of the Berkshires in Dallas. And you can see the tenure of that deal. The communists are coming, the Red Scare, United Nations. These are all common talking points of the Birch Society. They're a bunch of wackos, basically. Well, after he lost that, he milled around for while, and he got involved with a real highly publicized event. Some people call it the last Civil War in America. There was going to be an integration of the University of Mississippi and Oxford. There's a man named James Meredith, a black guy, former Air Force veteran, a resident of Mississippi, who wanted to move from the black college into the University of Mississippi. He filled out all the paperwork and they accepted him. He wrote a letter back and he said, well, thank you for the acceptance, but I'll be honest with you, but you know, I'm a black man, or a Negro, whatever we call him back then. And then he turned around and didn't accept it. Walker was kind of monitoring this from Dallas. You know, this is kind of heating up here, you know. And so a little bit before September 30th, Walker actually did write a letter to President Kennedy. I don't know if he sent it, but it's in his papers. Scolded him for not honoring the Monroe Doctrine, basically just being soft on communism. Anyway, Walker got a wild idea that he was going to have this big showdown. So let's go over there and support Governor Ross Barnett's efforts to keep James Meredith out of the university. He wanted 10,000 strong from every state to come over to Oxford, support Barnett, and then bring your tents and skillets. So he kind of started building this up. Press questioned, what are you going to do? I mean, what if there's, violence, He kind of avoided that question. Actually, they did fly over there, but he went with his buddy, Robert Surrey, his Bircher buddies, and the marshals came down. The Justice Department, Bobby Kennedy, and the Kennedys were monitoring this. In the back channels, they were trying to work out a deal with Governor Barnett, who's a Democrat. Hey, you need to let this guy in. You're breaking the law. This is the law of the land. Nicholas Katzenbach ended going down there as representative of the Justice Department. So anyway, the marshals show up on the 30th, and this is going to be the day that James Meredith is enrolled in the university. And all of a sudden, all these people show up on the campus from all over, a lot of out-of-towners, rednecks, Klan. These are pretty violent protesters. Of course, there were students on campus as well. So the marshals surrounded the area, and then around 7:30 at night on the 30th, the riot broke out. Now, Walker was there. There's many people that saw him there. He was standing by the Lyceum building up there, and people were saying he was directing traffic up there, telling these rioters what to do. Hey, go charge them, do this. He's acting like a general on the battlefield. Anyway, the Kennedys knew he was there. The FBI was tailing. 2 people were killed. Scores and dozens of people were injured, marshals and everybody. Kennedy gave the order to send the army down from Tennessee. So they crossed over from the state line of Tennessee down and to support the marshals. I mean, these marshals are pretty brave individuals because there were Molotov cocktails being thrown, rocks, gunfire. And at one point, the marshals tried to, contacted Bobby Kennedy and said, hey, they're firing at us. Can we shoot back? And Kennedy said, no, hell no. That's pretty, that's not what you want to hear. But in the meantime, in the long run, that was the right call because had the marshals shot back and killed somebody or whatever, now you got a bigger thing on your hands. The army came down, supported them, and took control. And by, 4 or 5 in the morning, everything was under control there. And meanwhile, Walker had gone back to his motel room over in Oxford. And then in the morning, he started to leave with Robert Surrey in a car. And he was stopped at a checkpoint.
Former Major General Edwin Walker, who came here from his home in Texas, is put under arrest and held in high bail on charges of inciting insurrection. He was flown to a federal prison hospital as relative calm settled on the town in the greatest crisis the South has faced since the Civil War.
And the orders were given from the Justice Department to have Walker go through a psych exam.
Psychiatric examination, yes.
Yes. They want to know if this guy's crazy. He's insane. He's reckless. He's doing crazy things. And, was he able to stand trial in all this? He was supposed to go through like a 60 to 90 day examination. Anyway, they worked out a deal with the federal attorneys up there that Walker could go home to Dallas and get his psych exam there. And he passes. He did a physical exam on him as well, kind of like a weekend affair at Parkland. Dr. Robert Surrey gave the psych exam. Same guy that did Jack Ruby. Anyway, he passes. This is a picture of Walker back in Love Field. Hero's welcome. There's another picture of Walker going back to her hearing in Oxford at the federal circuit judge, Clayton. Of course, his mother's with him. And to the guy on the right is Robert Morse. That's one of his advisors and lawyers. He's a controversial figure himself. They go on January 21st of 63. He goes up to Oxford and the grand jury drops the charges. So now Walker is a free man. By this time now, he is real popular. So popular, he caught the eye of an evangelist out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, Billy James Hargis. And Billy James Hargis is an interesting character. He was a radio evangelist primarily, and a lot of radio stations were broadcasting shows throughout the South. He was kind of one of those fire and brimstone preachers. J. Edgar Hoover called him a hillbilly preacher. Not a lot of people are aware that he was also known as the balloon preacher. And when I say that, he was back in the 50s. He actually went to West Germany during the occupation over there. He convinced somebody over there that he was going to get a bunch of Bibles, stick them in these balloons, launch these balloons all throughout West Germany on the line, and they would eventually show up in East Germany and Soviet bloc nations. So Walker and Hargis were kindred spirits. So they decided to go out on this midnight ride tour from old Paul Revere's clarion call to the Patriots. And they were going to go give a speaking tour throughout the United States. It was a bus tour starting in Miami, 2 or 3 months, speaking the whole way throughout the United States, all the way to the very end at Los Angeles. Very successful tours, big turnouts. They got a bunch of monetary donations out of it as well, and a lot of publicity out of it. So Walker goes home to Dallas after this tour on April 8, 1963. Then what happened a couple days later? This.
Well, the police from the city came in to investigate a rifle shot that was fired into the house, fired through the west window, and hit the sill and hit the wall across the room and went through the wall over the desk at which I was sitting. This happened at 9 o'clock last night. Well, there's an enemy within this country, and of course it's the same enemy that represents the position that we should do away with the House Un-American Activities Committee, that we should destroy our local police forces, and that we should do away with our military forces.
Walker was slightly wounded that night on his right arm. He had minor bleeding and refused medical attention. He took a little shrapnel from probably the bullet casing. It shredded out, striking his forearm he had on the desk while working on his 1962 tax returns. The man in front of him is Bob Surrey. We now see that Mr. Surrey is wearing a light-colored shirt. There is a theory out there that Surrey was involved in a staged phony shooting assisting Oswald. That's easily dismissed because a 14-year-old kid saw a man wearing dark clothing in the adjoining LDS church parking lot when interviewed by the FBI in June of '64. Lots of people thought it was a staged fake shooting for publicity. He didn't need that. He already had a very successful speaking tour across the nation. Lots of publicity. He was injured, you know. How do you fake that? Here's a diagram drawn by Bob Surrey at the Warren Commission. Well, the north side on the very top would be the back of the alleyway behind the Walker home. South would be the front entrance on Turtle Creek Boulevard. West is on the left, which would be Dr. Ruth Jackson's home. And then on the other side, that would be the LDS Mormon Church that was there at that time. It's no longer there now. Now on the north side, you can see an emblem marked A. That is a window where the bullet hit that Surrey drew it. Now down below that, you'll see a little rectangle there. That's Walker's desk. The little circle is the position of Walker where he sat. And the arrow is where the bullet hit the wall above Walker's head. So this picture that was found, Oswald's belongings at the Payne home, if you look at the bottom floor, the very left corner, that is the window where the shot came through from this picture taken by Oswald. And to the left, there's a lattice fence there. I don't have a picture of that, but you can see it. And then you have the 1957 Chevrolet with the punched out license plate. Let me talk about that real quick because that brings up all kinds of conspiracy things on whom that car belonged to. That car belonged to one of Walker's volunteers. Charles Clear was his name. The Dallas police went out there to see if they could determine what car that was. They found it and ran the license tag on it. He was registered to Charles Clear, who Bob Surrey thought it belonged to in his Warren Commission testimony. And it was Charles Clear, no doubt about it. Oswald punched that license plate out. All right, now let's get to an ear witness of a 14-year-old kid. We went out there a couple of years ago. A 14-year-old kid was staying at his godfather's house on Newton Street nearby. That home is directly behind the Mormon church parking lot. He heard the shot that night. He went over to the backyard fence, stood up on a little bicycle leaning up there, and looked over and was looking directly into the LDS parking lot. There are two men that he saw, and this gets into another conspiracy theory. So the FBI went out there in June of '64. So they wanted to do their own investigation. They didn't talk to Walker. They didn't want to talk to Walker. Well, they did talk to Kurt Coleman, the 14-year-old kid. They did talk to, I think, Ruth Jackson and Marion Bouvet and some LDS church members. Bouvet was a person living with Dr. Jackson. So what they did was they recreated where Coleman was when he heard the shot and where he was standing on that back fence, which was only a short distance of 14 foot away from the porch to the fence. And this is a picture of it. I had to highlight it in red a little bit on where these two men were remembered by Coleman. There's a number 1 and a number 2 designating each man. The number 3 is where Coleman was positioned over the fence. The letters A and B are each respected vehicles. And then number 1 was a man getting into the car right up there at the fence line, real close to Coleman. Number 2 guy was going over to a vehicle parked along the fence line that separates the Walker home and the LDS parking lot. You can see that number 1 where Coleman first saw that guy getting into the car, parked with the letter A, which Coleman described as a 1950 Ford. There on the right side, along the Walker fence line, was another vehicle that was parked, marked B. The 2 is where Coleman saw this guy walk to that car. So we're going to get another view of it here. So here's a side view of it. B is where the 1958 Chevy 2-door vehicle was parked. The number 2 is the man heading to that car. The letter C is the alley that goes behind the Walker home. If you see to the right of that C mark is a very, very important feature. There's like a little stockade fence structure there. It has a pointed tip wood. This is where the LDS church put their trash cans in so trash men can pick them up in the alleyway. The view from Kurt Coleman to the alleyway where the shooting occurred is significant. So whether you believe it or it was Oswald or whoever, Kurt Coleman could not see him, as his structure blocked his viewpoint. Kurt Coleman only saw the other two men, which was very important. I remember, Fred, when we went out there, I pointed out the old concrete pad that the stockade fence structure sat on along the alley. Right, okay, here's another view of it back in the church parking lot, looking straight down the alleyway. That's the FBI white station wagon there, which is roughly where the 1950 Ford was parked. Number one man was wherever that man was first headed to, that 1950 Ford. This suggests number one man was coming from the church, is far off to the left out of picture. The number two man is where he saw the other guy walking toward the Walker LDS fence line and sees the alley right behind the Walker home. One of the church members told the FBI that he has noticed other visitors parked along that fence line who often use that parking lot to visit nearby neighbors. So what ties Oswald to this Walker shooting? The first things that happened was his 2-page note to Marina in Russian that was found in a Russian Helpful Hints homemaker book that Ruth Payne gave to an Irving officer along with other items to give it to Marina, who was being sequestered. I believe it was at the end of Six Flags in Arlington. This 2-page note was stuck inside that Russian Helpful Hints book. And so anyway, by the time the Irving police officer got that book and gave it to the Secret Service that were, had her under guard there, they of course checked everything out. Well, they found this note. So now they're asking questions. What is this? Secret Service had a Russian-speaking agent named Leo Kopatsky. So he saw this note and he approached Marina about it. And then he went over to Ruth Payne and asked if she wrote this note. She denied writing it. The letter is written in all Russian, in poor grammar and spelling. You remember, Fred, when Paul Gregory mentioned that the Oswald spoke excellent conversation Russian, but his spelling and grammar were horrendous. That comment was also mentioned by this Russian-speaking agent, Kopatsky. And as you can see, there's too much detail in there that only Marina and Oswald would know about. Nowhere in this letter does it mention Walker, and there's a good reason why he didn't. I think if Marina had found that letter too soon, that would have tipped Marina off and do something to stop him. She knew he was a violent man, so that's why he probably did not put Walker's name on there. He didn't want her to know where he was going. What else would we track Lee Harvey? CE 573 is the Walker bullet. That's the one in the archives. And to the right is CE 399, the so-called magic bullet. Well, it's not magic. So I got this from David Von Pine's site. Well, it's an interesting thing, but you can see both of them are copper jacketed with a white rifling twist. And the length of that CE 573, because it was smashed, was about 1 5/8 inch lengthwise. CE 399 is somewhere around 3 inches. So it's definitely damaged. So they look similar, okay? Well, when the police had that slug in their possession, they sent it over to the city-county lab over there at Parkland Hospital. The Dallas police had that slug, but they could not determine the caliber of that bullet because of the smashed up condition. So when the FBI got a hold of that bullet, they were charged with trying to figure out what caliber it was. And what they did is that at the very bottom of that bullet, the base of the bullet, there's that little ring there. It's called a cannular. And that sits inside the cartridge where the gunpowder is and a primer on bottom. All they did was just compare that cannular to CE 399 or other Western bullets, and they matched. In Oliver Stone's film, Destined Betrayed, they were claiming they could not find the Secret Service agent Elmer Todd's initials on that CE 399 bullet. So when we got that high resolution photos, we found it, and sure enough, it was on there. So I thought to myself, well, why don't I just do the same with CE 573, the Walker bullet, and found the N on that Walker bullet, which is Officer Norville's initial, at the base of the bullet. Then there it is. There's the N. So there's this crazy, crazy theory out there that's really embarrassing, that it's supposed to be a steel-jacketed bullet, because they mentioned a steel-jacketed bullet, the Walker case report. And these crazy theorists say it's got to be a steel-jacketed bullet. Couldn't be, the one in archives is a fake or some type of bullet switcheroo. So first, this is completely nuts. I don't care if you call it a plastic bullet or silver bullet, there is an N on that bullet in the National Archives. So this steel-jacketed bullet is just another fantasy. It's a really crackpot embarrassment. Well, this was questioned by the Warren Commission. Was one of the guys that asked the question to Robert Frazier of the FBI lab, why do they call bullets steel jacket bullets? Frazier said some people do call it a steel jacketed, but actually it's a copper alloy bullet. So Frazier explained it, but unfortunately certain conspiracy theorists will not accept that. Of course, it's all part of that 10,000 men conspiracy. Yeah, all the way up to the high levels of government. All right, let's get down to this escape route. There's a lot of people that are interested in this. When the FBI went back out in '64, they went out and they had Oswald's pictures. And along there in the Oswald pictures were a couple of pictures of railroad tracks. Well, that's kind of funny. I didn't know he was a train buff. I drew this diagram some years ago, what they theorized could be an escape route by Oswald. If you look up in the left corner, I wish my pointer would work, but under the TH in theorized is the Walker home. And it crosses Avondale there, an alley that goes directly across. It went all the way to Irving Avenue. Now, in one of Oswald's pictures, one of his pictures, he was looking down the alleyway, looking toward Avondale from the LDS parking lot. In that picture, in the background, there was a high-rise building. That building was 21 Turtle Creek Square, and that was being constructed during that time in March of 1963. They determined that the photo was probably taken on the weekend of March 9th or March 10th. They were theorizing Oswald might have gone straight down that alley. And where did it possibly go from there? Well, he could have gone down to Turtle Creek Boulevard or wherever. Aware that he had photos of the railroad tracks, then they noticed a 90-foot footpath going up there to the tracks near Turtle Creek Drive. Along that 90-foot footpath, there was scattered brush piles going up, which they theorized a rifle could be hidden. That time after March 10th, 2 days later, he ordered the client's rifle from the post office. 2 days later, he mailed it, and he probably mailed off the Seaport Traders revolver as well. He went to New Orleans, came back to Dallas, and finally got a job at the Texas School Book Depository. And then he got a room at the Beckley Rooming House. On October 23rd of 1963, there was a Walker rally at the Dallas Memorial Auditorium. Anyway, there was scuttlebutt amongst all these Walker people that Adlai Stevenson was coming to town to give a speech on the United Nations Day. And if Birchers hate anything worse, it was the United Nations. So, they had signs all over Dallas with a lot of these right-wingers, Walker friends, showed up, and Walker gave his speech. And, he just went on about all kinds of crazy stuff and got them all riled up. Funny thing about it, there's a person that didn't get riled up about it, and it was Lee Harvey Oswald. He was there that night. And here's part of his writings. I don't know why he was there. He was stalking them. I don't think he could have killed him. He would have been dead himself before he got out of there, but who knows? Yeah, this is at the Adlai Stevenson speech the very next day. And this brought a lot of shame on Dallas. Walker had riled up a lot of these people the night before. And guess who he was going to go, because this Adlai Stevenson talk was free too. This picture here from Dallas Public Library is the guy in the middle standing up in the crowd is a guy named Frank McGehee. He started the National Indignation Convention. It was all about a protest about, they found up in Perrin Air Force Base north of Dallas that the Air Force was training Yugoslavian pilots. And whoa, this is a communist bloc people, you know. So they thought, oh, this is it, you know, the commies are in here and they're taking over and our government's training them up and everything. Anyway, McGehee, very anti-UN, probably a bircher, stood up and started making a ruckus. But anyway, McGehee gets thrown out of the building. Well, interesting story about this. How did all these Walker people get in here? The police, there weren't a big police presence there. So they arrived later. So all these Walker supporters and right-wingers, conservatives got in there and got their seats. It's free. Just going up and down, flying Confederate flags, air horns, you name it. Simpson gets through his speech. He starts to leave. This is when he gets hit over the head with a placard by a bircher lady. And then he gets sped upon by a University of North Texas student. Almost run over people getting out of there. But the mayor, Earl Cabell, gave a public apology. Probably thought, bad now, why did I give that hat to Walker? 61. And who else thought General Walker was up to it? Well, Jack Ruby, of course.
Why not?
You know, Ruby found that Weissman ad in the Dallas Morning News, got all upset about it, and he knew that the Walker people, the Birchers, and on, these conservatives were anti-Semitic. I mean, they were people were putting swastikas on Jewish merchants downtown.
He was very sensitive to anti-Semitism, and he got into a lot of fights in the military. He would really, it really bothered him. He noticed it wherever it was.
This is Robert Stubbsfield writing up about Ruby on his psych exam, and Ruby talks about taking that Preludin, like speed, diet pills they called them back then. This is kind of General Walker's bizarre behavior. And at this point, I want to address a sensitive subject, and I don't want to really get down on this, but General Walker was a closet homosexual. He kept it secret all his life, but most of them did, you know, back then, especially if you're in the military. I mean, you could be booted out of the military if you found out. He kept it well hidden, but there were whispers about it. He was arrested twice, 76 and 77. And then before that, in 72, if you recall, Governor George Wallace, which was Walker was one of his big supporters. He loved Wallace. In fact, he attended Wallace's speech here in Dallas 4 days before the assassination. When Arthur Bremer took that shot at Governor Wallace over there, so he heads down to a park. He holds like a midnight vigil at a park for Governor Wallace. And I'm sure there was a lot of people showing up for that. Anyway, the park has a curfew. I think the curfew was after midnight. The police went up there and tried to get him to leave, and he said, "No, I'm not going anywhere." Anyway, this is Walker with a goatee, looking all fancy now, walking out of courtroom number 5 for this hearing for his violation. But he's increasingly getting more and more bizarre. After the assassination, these right-wingers all kind of kept a lower profile, I should say. It was very embarrassing because they were very anti-Kennedy, and so he kind of went on. He was a shooting star. He wasn't a shooting star anymore. People would come out and see him, and less and less people were interested in him. So he started being kind of like a reclusive type individual. What did Walker do later on? He got his retirement back in 1982. He had a lawyer work on that. After all, he had given a pretty damn good service, So
did he get his pension back?
He did, yes, sir. Well, he was getting a little financially strapped there a little later, He had a big lawsuit that he won initially against the Associated Press in the lower courts in Texas over the Ole Miss riots. Once the grand jury dismissed that, sue him for libel. AP had many outlets, and I think you're on 11 or 12 of them he'd sued. But he won that, and I think he won it all the way up in the Supreme Court of Texas. But it got knocked down by the U.S. Supreme Court. And the reason they did win, because at that point, newspapers could not be sued for libel on political figures. And what happened to old General? He died in 1993. This is the death certificate I've got from the state of Texas. He died, the initial cause of the death was what they call ventricular fibrillation, direct result of his years and years of smoking. He is buried down here in Center Point, Texas. That's a family grave site down there. And that pretty much concludes my long presentation.
Thank you very much. The big question I want to ask you is, what do you, to me it's an open and shut case, but what do you say to conspiracy people who seem to find a variety of minutiae to claim that Oswald was not guilty of trying to kill Walker?
The reason they do this in the Kennedy assassination. They take certain particular things out of context, or they like a steel-jacketed bullet. But they don't look at, hey, the Walker, the letter, the Marina. So you have to look at all the totality of evidence.
Right.
Does it make sense? Does it flow? Is it rational? There's people that are emotionally attached to Oswald, okay, that will just defend him to no degree. But you got to look at all the evidence. Why did he order this rifle right there close to the Walker shooting? Why did he take backyard photos dressed up in black?
Or why did he shoot Kennedy and take a shot at Walker when they're so different people?
Oh yeah, that's another thing. Yeah. Well, we can understand he's a fascist, but he loved Kennedy. He never talked bad about Kennedy. That's not true. He did say some bad things about Kennedy. But
he was incensed at Kennedy's Cuba policy.
Yeah. You remember our trip down to New Orleans? We went down to the Lafayette Library down there.
Yep.
Close walking distance to Magazine Street apartment. In that library, there was a book, William Manchester's book, Portrait of a President. Well, I guess somebody stamped fair play for Cuba in the flyleaf of that book. New Orleans. That's in the record. He was an unhinged individual. Let me say it. I'm going to say he's a pretty smart guy. I mean, he's pretty intelligent. He read. He was a wily coyote type of guy, but he's a very arrogant son of a gun. I mean, he hardly got along with anybody. Of course, you try to get a motive. Why do you do this? Why do you do that? I think he was just mad at the world in general. Of course, they're not going to believe me anyways.
No, they're not going to believe you no matter what you say. No. And it doesn't matter. I mean, they have to paint Oswald as completely innocent as the white snow around us, and it's unbelievable. Well, look, thank you very much for being on the Trail of Delusion. We'll have to save your story about CE 399 and the initials on that for another episode. But anyways, thank you very much. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you for taking time out, and thank you for the good work.